At 76, Alice thought the worst part of her life was over. She had survived the death of her husband and 45 years of relentless labor at her sewing machine to earn a roof over her head and a future for her son. She had built a fortress out of sweat and silent sacrifice, but she didn't know that the most brutal war was just beginning. The storm wasn't coming from the outside. It arrived in the form of Kimberly, her future daughter-in-law. Right within the sanctuary she had spent a lifetime building, Alice was about to face humiliation, betrayal, and a silent war where she could lose everything: her home, her granddaughter, and even her dignity. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. The sound of the sewing machine had been the soundtrack of her life. Even now, with her hands marked by arthritis and her eyesight fading, Alice could hear in her memory the constant tapping of the needle in and out of the fabric. At 76 years old, that rhythm was part of her, like the beating of her heart. For decades, she had sewn relentlessly so that Martin, her only son, would never lack a roof, food, or schooling. She had done it alone since that night she was widowed, when the accident that killed Walter, her husband, suddenly tore away half her world. She didn't have time to mourn as she would have liked. At just 31 years old with a 3-year-old boy, grief had to be tucked away in a corner to make way for the urgent need to survive. The first months were a parade of cold dawns and sleepless nights. She washed other people's clothes for money, and as soon as she could, she sat in front of the old singer she inherited from her mother. The needles broke frequently, her back burned, and her fingers grew numb. But there was no alternative. Between stitches, she imagined Martin's face when she could one day give him a home of their own. It took her 15 years to achieve it. First, she collected coins in a jar hidden on top of a wardrobe. Then came dollars folded inside an old notebook, until one day, with her heart racing, she walked to the title company and signed the deed. That house with simple walls, a wide yard, and a concrete floor was her greatest triumph. In the center of the living room, she placed a photo of Walter because she felt that, somehow, he had also helped build it. Martin grew up without luxuries, but he never lacked the essentials. Alice enrolled him in the local elementary school and later in a technical high school, convinced that education would give him a better future. Sometimes, while he slept, she would watch him and think that it was all worth it. The broken nails, the aching back, the meals she skipped so he could eat more. He was her reason and her pride. The years passed, and sacrifice became routine. When the sewing machine was no longer enough, she learned to do clothing alterations for a local department store, charging little but ensuring constant work. She never asked anyone for help, and if someone tried to give her charity disguised as a favor, she would smile and thank them, but with a wounded soul. She didn't want to depend on anyone. This fierce independence was her shield. It was forged in the lonely nights after Walter's death, tempered by every penny she had to stretch, every sneer she endured from families who saw her as just the seamstress. She had built a fortress around her heart and Martin's future, and the bricks were her own silent sacrifices. She guarded it jealously. The idea of anyone, even a new daughter-in-law, breaching those walls filled her with a primal, unspoken dread. She had survived poverty. She wasn't sure she could survive betrayal. Now, at her age, she thought the time had come to rest. She imagined quiet mornings watering the pots of azaleas growing in the yard, afternoons drinking coffee with fresh-baked muffins, and nights watching television until sleep overcame her. She believed her old age would be marked by calm, with Martin visiting her often, perhaps bringing a good woman with whom to share joys, and hopefully a grandchild who would bring back the bustle of childhood. But the reality she knew was about to change. Although she didn't know it, the storm was already forming. Martin, now 48 years old, had been dating someone for months whom Alice had not met in person. She only knew her name, Kimberly. The few times he mentioned her, he did so with a strange glint in his eyes, as if she were an achievement or a prize he was finally receiving. Alice, wanting to see him happy, didn't ask uncomfortable questions. One afternoon, while sewing the hem of a skirt, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Martin entered with a nervous smile. He wore a clean shirt, his hair freshly combed, and an intense cologne that filled the living room. "Mom, I want to introduce you to someone," he said, adjusting his shirt collar. Alice left the needle on the table. She felt a mixture of curiosity and joy. Perhaps this woman would be the one to restore her dream of a united family. She thought about preparing coffee and donuts, but Martin was already turning toward the door. "Wait here. We'll be right in." The gate closed, and Alice, alone in the living room, mentally rehearsed how she would receive the visitor. She smoothed her dress, adjusted a throw pillow on the sofa, and placed Martin's favorite mug on the table as a small, welcoming gesture. She looked at the photo of Walter on the wall and smiled at him, as if asking for his blessing. She couldn't imagine that this afternoon would mark the beginning of something she had never suffered before. Not poverty, not loneliness, but humiliation within her own home. And although she didn't know it yet, a lifetime of love and devotion would be put to the test in the cruelest way. Alice sat down again, unaware that behind the door, the heels that, in time, she would learn to recognize as the echo of contempt were already approaching. The doorbell rang before the fresh brewed coffee finished dripping. Alice wiped her hands on her apron, quickly tidied her short hair, and went to open the door with a ready smile. Martin was on the other side, his face lit up with emotion. Beside him stood a tall, immaculate woman with slender heels and very red lips. The perfume arrived before her greeting. "Mom, this is Kimberly." Hiding shyly behind Kimberly's leg was a small girl with big eyes, about 8 years old. "And this is Mia, my daughter," Kimberly added, almost as an afterthought. "A pleasure," Alice said, her smile widening as she crouched slightly toward the child. "Hello, Mia." Mia offered a tiny wave. Kimberly, however, looked Alice up and down, as if evaluating a poorly sewn garment. She smiled without showing her teeth and, instead of shaking Alice's hand, grabbed the doorframe and stepped inside. "What a typical house," she said. "It has personality." Alice set them aside and led them to the living room. She had put donuts on a tray and used the floral tablecloth she reserved for visitors. She placed the mugs on the table carefully, trying not to let the spoons make noise. Martin talked non-stop, explaining where they had met, that she worked for a very serious company, that she had good taste. Kimberly's gaze wandered, like someone sizing up a room before moving furniture. "Fresh brewed coffee?" Alice offered. "I make it with a little brown sugar. It's delicious." "Oh, I hardly take sugar," Kimberly replied. "But well, if you already made it." She took a sip and left the mug, never touching it again. Then she walked over to the wall and looked at the portrait of Walter. She ran a finger across the glass. "It's dusty." Alice blinked. Martin said nothing. She smiled patiently and took the portrait into her lap to clean it with the edge of her apron. "I'll give it a good cleaning later," she murmured. Kimberly took a donut, broke it open as if inspecting a sample, and looked at the crumbs. "It's a little dry. I know a much nicer bakery near my office. I'll bring some another day." Martin laughed nervously. Alice nodded and changed the subject. She asked about her family, her neighborhood, her life. Kimberly answered in brief sentences, twisting the ring on her ring finger as if counting the time. "I live alone," she said. "I'm used to my things being done right. I hate half-done things." The sentence hung in the air. Alice swallowed. In her head, the words "things done right" sounded like a judgment. She took a deep breath. She wanted to imagine it was insecurity, not disdain. When they left, Alice cleared the table slowly. She felt a small pang, minimal, like a needle-piercing, thick fabric. She thought it was normal for a first impression to be strange. "They'll get along over time," she told herself. The only uncomplicated part of the visits was Mia. While Kimberly inspected the house, Mia would drift toward the sewing room, fascinated by the spools of thread. Alice, seeing her curiosity, showed her how to thread a needle and sew a simple button onto scrap fabric. The little girl's concentration was absolute. "You're a natural," Alice praised, and Mia beamed. Those small moments of connection quickly became the only thing Alice looked forward to. She prayed an Our Father looking at Walter's photo and went to sleep with the faith of someone who, despite everything, wants to believe. The following days brought short visits. Kimberly always entered in a hurry, her heels clicking down the hallway. Alice noticed she never came empty-handed. A flower arrangement that clashed with everything, a scented candle to help with the smell, a set of more presentable towels for the bathroom. Each object seemed like a verdict. "Listen, mother-in-law." She began to call her on the third day, using the title like a nickname. "This color in the living room just dulls the light. Haven't you thought about something more modern?" Alice, with her needle threaded, looked up from the sewing machine. "I like it bright, honey. We get a lot of sun in here." "Exactly. The sun demands pure white. And those curtains. No, they're so dated." Martin would arrive after work, tired and hungry. Alice would serve him a simple stew and warm cornbread. Kimberly would taste it sparingly. "Did you use lard?" she asked one night. "I don't eat fried food. It's just a little oil," Alice replied, watching her tone. "Next time, nothing. Martin has a very sensitive stomach. I've eaten like this my whole life," Martin tried to say with a slight laugh. "And that's why you have colitis," Kimberly sentenced, ending the topic. Alice swallowed her response, stirred the pot carefully, and stored the lard in the back of the pantry as if it were guilty. That same night, Kimberly opened the refrigerator and started rearranging jars. "This is expired. This smells strong. This shouldn't even be in here. I'll bring a list tomorrow. And another thing, the clothes hanging in the yard can be seen from the street. How trashy. You need to hang them on the other side or buy a dryer." "I've always hung them there," Alice said softly. "Yes, but now I'm coming over often. I don't like people seeing underwear hanging out." Martin put his arm around her shoulders, trying to soften the edge in her words. "Mom, Kimberly is just trying to help." Alice nodded to keep from crying. She didn't want to fight at the first bend in the road. She thought about the peace of Sundays, the sound of the radio, the aroma of baking. She saw it all drifting further away. The biggest casualty of this new tension was Mia, Kimberly's 8-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. Mia had, until recently, spent afternoons with Alice, learning to sew buttons and drinking lemonade in the yard. But Kimberly had begun limiting the visits, claiming the house wasn't stimulating enough for the child and that Alice's old-fashioned ways were a bad influence. For Alice, the loss of those afternoons was the sharpest pain, a theft of the one joy she had eagerly anticipated in her old age. One afternoon, Kimberly arrived not just with bags, but with a large suitcase. "My friend's house is being repaired," she announced, not asking for permission. "I'll be staying here for a while, right, Martin?" Martin kissed her on the forehead and nodded. Before Alice could process it, Kimberly was pulling jars, boxes, a rolled-up curtain, and shiny throw pillows from her bags. She spread the pillows on Alice's sofa, the same one where Martin used to fall asleep as a child. "Look how nice. It brightens up the space," she said. "And please, could you remove that little floral tablecloth? It looks like something from a country diner." Alice slowly folded the tablecloth, her hands trembling. "It was my mother's. All the more reason to store it, so it doesn't get ruined." She went to the bedroom, put it in a box, and stared for a moment into the back of the wardrobe. Her sewing patterns were piled there, short pencils, the measuring tape that still smelled of talcum powder. She breathed in to regain her strength and returned to the living room. Kimberly was still making changes. She opened a window and commented, "It smells damp." "It's the season," Alice explained. "Here in Virginia, when it rains, the walls sweat." "Right. I know a contractor who can paint this in 2 days." "We can't afford that right now," Alice said plainly. Kimberly smiled with sharp sweetness. "Don't worry, I'll pay for it. I like to live nicely." Alice felt the phrase like an invisible shove. She looked at Martin. He avoided her eyes and fiddled with his keys. "If Kimberly wants to help," he said, "don't make her feel weird." That night, Alice didn't turn on the sewing machine. She sat on the porch listening to the crickets, touched the pot of azaleas, and thought about her imagined old age. It wasn't like this. Still, she promised herself patience, for Martin's sake. The following Sunday, Kimberly arrived early with a cake from an expensive bakery. She walked in without knocking. Alice was sweeping. "I brought something decent for coffee," she announced, placing the box on the table. And by the way, I got you an appointment at the salon. We need to fix that haircut. It's too short, too messy." Alice touched her hair. She had worn it short for comfort for years. "I'm fine like this, honey. I like it. Comfort is one thing, letting yourself go is another. I'm taking you. A woman's hair is her reflection." Martin arrived with a wide smile. "Ready? We're going out to eat with some of my colleagues from work. Kimberly says it's time for my mom to look like the queen she is." Alice felt her son's hug and held on to him for half a second longer than usual. She didn't say that the word queen sounded hollow when the person saying it wouldn't look her in the eye. She put on a clean sweater, took her purse, and left. At the family meal, Kimberly shone with jokes and anecdotes. Everyone laughed. Alice watched her, searching for a crack. She found none, only polish. Upon returning home, Kimberly closed the door and in the same pleasant voice from the gathering, issued another instruction. "From now on, no music in the morning. I meditate and it distracts me. Oh, and please, no fried onions. The smell lingers all day." "I like to put the radio on early," Alice whispered, more to herself than to them. "Well, there are 3 of us now," Kimberly finished. "We have to think of everyone." Alice then understood the unsaid word. Kimberly already saw herself living there. Her heart tightened. It wasn't anger. It was fear of losing her space, her routine, her refuge. She leaned on the counter so they wouldn't see her legs shaking. That week, Kimberly arrived with a suitcase. "I'm staying for a few days," she said. "My friend's house is being repaired, right, Martin?" He kissed her on the forehead and nodded. Alice didn't know when a few days became "I'm moving my things in." Kimberly put clothes in Martin's closet and left cosmetics in the bathroom. She put her toothbrush in the glass where Alice kept her toothpaste. She replaced the towel on the hook with a more presentable one. The mirror filled with greasy fingerprints. "Don't worry," Kimberly clarified. "I'm very organized." That night, Alice wanted to pray in her room, but the murmur of voices from the living room followed her like a hum. She thought of Walter. She imagined telling him everything, asking his advice. "Be quiet. Watch. Don't give up your house," she told herself silently, as if he were speaking to her from the photo. The next day, Kimberly entered Alice's room without knocking. "Can I use the iron? Yours is very old, but it'll get me out of this jam." "Of course, honey," she replied, getting up from the bed. Kimberly took the iron, set it on the ironing board, and accidentally pushed the small box where Alice kept her wedding corsage pin. The box fell, and the clasp opened. An antique button rolled onto the floor. Kimberly stepped on it with her heel, crushing it, and didn't even bend down to pick up the pieces. "Oh, sorry. Everything in here is just so fragile." Alice bent down, gathered the small pieces with her fingers, and held them in her palm. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She straightened up with dignity, closed the small box, and put it back in its place. "It's okay," she said. It was already very old. In the afternoon, while hanging clothes, she heard Kimberly talking on the phone in the hallway. "Yeah, I've almost convinced Martin. This house needs a complete overhaul, and well, she's old. She can't manage it alone." Alice stopped the clothespin midway. She felt a new weight, not in her bones, but in the air of her home. It was as if someone had crossed a line without asking permission. That night, while serving dinner, Martin announced, "Mom, Kimberly and I are thinking of getting married soon." Alice hugged him genuinely. She wanted her son to be happy. But before she let go, she heard Kimberly. "And the house has space. We can make a larger room, knock down that patio wall. I'll take care of everything. It will look divine." Alice held her gaze. It wasn't long or defiant. It was clear. There, at a table with beans, rice, and warm cornbread, the conflict began that would have no turning back. Kimberly smiled triumphantly. Martin, oblivious, kissed his mother's forehead and didn't notice the tremor in her hands. A life's work, a sacred home, now threatened by a single, cold announcement. Alice's fortress, built with sacrifice, is about to be breached from the inside. This is the moment the silent war begins. Stay with us to see how Alice finds the strength to fight back. That night, Alice didn't sleep. She sat by the window and waited for the first light. When a distant rooster crowed, she decided she would not give up. She didn't know how or with what strength, but she would not surrender her home or her dignity to anyone. In the hallway, Kimberly's heels clicked early, unstoppable, marking territory. Alice tied her apron, smoothed her short hair with a quick pass, and walked to the kitchen. The next day would find her standing. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen when Kimberly appeared, immaculate as always, with her hair perfectly straightened and an expression that never boded well. She sat at the table and observed the plate Alice had left for her: scrambled eggs, hash browns, and toast wrapped in a cloth. "Is this what's for breakfast?" she asked, without touching the fork. "I don't eat fried food this early, and these hash browns are too greasy." Alice, who had woken up before dawn to prepare everything, pretended not to hear the tone. "If you want, I can make you something lighter." "No, don't worry. Martin and I ordered something on DoorDash, so you don't have to wear yourself out." Martin arrived just then, giving Kimberly a kiss on the forehead. "That's right, Mom. Don't work so hard." Alice clenched the apron in her hands. It wasn't effort, it was habit, but she remained silent. In the days that followed, every meal became an examination. Kimberly would take a bite, pause, and offer an observation. "It needs salt. It's too greasy. The meat is dry. The rice isn't like the kind I make." Martin would smile, shrugging as if these were just the simple quirks of newlyweds. "Kimberly's right, Mom. She just cooks differently." Alice swallowed the words along with the bitter coffee. She began to prepare dishes as she thought Kimberly would prefer. But then new comments would come. The vegetables were overcooked, the soup should be clearer, the bread smelled like an old oven. The cleaning wasn't spared either. One morning, Kimberly entered Alice's room while she was folding clothes. "Is this how you iron Martin's shirts?" she asked, lifting one with 2 fingers. "Look at these wrinkles on the sleeves. I've always ironed them this way. He likes them." "Well, I don't. Leave them. I'll take them to the dry cleaners." And just like that, she began taking tasks from her hands that Alice had done for decades, not as help, but as if pushing her out of a territory that belonged to her. In the yard, Kimberly pointed at the planters. "Don't you think those plants make everything look older?" "Some succulents would look better." "The azaleas provide shade and bloom all year," Alice replied. "Yes, but they look so old-fashioned." That afternoon, Martin brought a new planter with a small plant to make the living room look more modern, Mom. Alice smiled on the outside, but inside, she felt how they were tearing out, one by one, the threads of the life she had woven. Even her clothes became targets of criticism. One night, when they were going out to dinner, Kimberly looked her up and down. "Is that dress new?" "No, I bought it a few years ago. You can tell. The cut is outdated." "And those shoes?" "Oh, mother-in-law, you need to update your look. I like them because they're comfortable, but they're not flattering. Comfort doesn't have to clash with style." Martin, adjusting his tie, intervened. "Kimberly just wants you to look good, Mom. Don't take it the wrong way." Alice nodded. But that night, looking at herself in the restaurant bathroom mirror, she no longer saw the woman who always made do with what she had. She saw someone who was beginning to doubt her own choices. Little by little, Kimberly stopped asking and started ordering. She changed the tablecloth for one that matched the curtains she had brought. She reorganized the pantry to optimize space and put the old dishes in a box because they were taking up room. Martin observed everything without intervening. When Alice tried to protest, he would simply sigh and say, "Mom, she's just trying to improve things for us. It's for the best. The house." Alice knew those walls were the fruit of her sacrifice, but they were beginning to feel less and less like hers. Every comment, every replaced object, was like a stitch unraveling what she had sewn for years. One night, while folding the floral tablecloth Kimberly had stored away, Alice understood that humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it seeps in like a constant whisper, wearing you down until one day you realize you don't live the same way, even if you're still under the same roof. She promised herself she would resist in silence, for now, but something inside her was beginning to build strength, like a taut seam that could burst at any moment. Mia appeared at the front door, running, with her backpack open, her hair ribbon half undone, and her uniform wrinkled after a long day of classes. The door was ajar, so she pushed it hard and crossed the threshold like someone returning to their favorite place in the world. "Grandma," she shouted, her voice so full of life that even the azaleas seemed to tremble. Alice, who was in the yard hanging clothes, turned and dropped the clothespins into the basket. She opened her arms and received the little girl with a tight hug, so long it almost took her breath away. "Oh, my girl, you smell like sunshine and recess," she said, kissing her hair. Mia laughed, breathing in the scent of soap and damp earth she always found on her grandmother's clothes. To her, that mix was synonymous with home. "Mom dropped me off at the door. She said she had to go downtown with Dad," she commented quietly. Alice nodded without asking questions. She didn't want the child to feel caught in the middle of anything. She took her hand and led her to the kitchen. On the table was a glass pitcher with fresh lemonade, with slices floating like gold coins. "Here, you must be thirsty," she said, pouring a large glass. Mia drank it in one gulp and smiled. "Mom's lemonade doesn't taste like this. She puts too little sugar in it." Alice smiled, avoiding any comment. She cut a piece of coffee cake and placed it in front of her. "Eat slowly. It tastes better that way." While she chewed, the girl began to tell her about school, about how she played hide and seek at recess, and how the teacher told her she couldn't wear her flowered sweater because it doesn't match the uniform. "I love that sweater," Alice replied. "If you want, we can change the buttons to make it look more uniform." And then she won't say anything. Mia lit up. That complicity was a silent pact that needed no words. Grandma was always on her side. After their snack, Alice took a tin box with dented edges from the pantry. Inside were buttons of every color, ribbons saved for decades, and scraps of fabric that looked like pieces of history. "Pick one," she said. "Today we'll sew together." Mia plunged her hands in as if searching for treasure. She chose 3 green, leaf-shaped buttons. She sat on her grandmother's lap and watched as the needle pierced the fabric, moving in and out with the precision of a choreography Alice had perfected over the years. "Are you going to teach me to sew like you?" she asked. "Of course. But first, you have to learn not to prick your fingers. Did you prick yourself? Many times. And my mother used to say those little drops of blood were giving life to the fabric." The girl's eyes widened as if she had just discovered a magical secret. When they finished sewing the sweater, they went out to the yard. The sun painted the walls orange, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Mia helped water the azaleas, but ended up soaking her shoes. Alice didn't get angry. She took her to the utility sink, and while they wrung out her socks, she taught her how to make shapes with the soap foam. "Look, a mustache," she said, putting foam on her upper lip. Mia burst out laughing. "You look like a grandpa." The sound of that laughter filled the house, momentarily erasing the shadows Kimberly left with every visit. As the sun began to set, Alice turned on the radio at a low volume. On the table, she placed 2 mugs of hot chocolate and a plate of cookies. Mia snuggled into a chair, covering herself with a shawl that smelled like dinner and roasted coffee. "Tell me about when Dad was a boy," she asked. Alice spoke of kites made from newspaper, of falls while learning to ride a bike, of nights when Martin cried until she gave him bread and milk. Mia listened with an attention that even school couldn't draw from her. Between stories, Alice looked into her granddaughter's eyes and felt that there, in that clear gaze, was the last intact part of her family. But the moment was shattered by the sharp sound of heels at the entrance. Kimberly had arrived. Mia hugged her grandmother tightly, hiding her face in her shoulder. "I don't want to go yet," she whispered. "Tomorrow is another day, my girl." "I'll be waiting for you right here," Alice said, kissing her forehead. Kimberly entered with a brief smile and a quick "let's go," leaving no room for argument. She took the girl's hand and walked out. Alice followed her with her gaze until they disappeared down the street. She closed the door slowly, as if trying to trap a bit of the laughter's echo still floating in the house. She walked to the yard, stroked one of the azaleas, and promised herself that no one would steal this bond from her. She knew this affection, so pure and strong, was a refuge, but also a target. And in silence, she swore she would defend it with the same hands she had used to build her home, even if she had to bleed again to keep it. The afternoon sun beat down hard on the yard, tinting the sheets Alice was hanging on the line golden. The air smelled of soap and hot earth. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and hung the last garment, feeling the slight pull in her back that reminded her of years spent hunched over the sewing machine. It was then she heard the voice that always ignited her heart. "Grandma!" Mia yelled from the gate leading to the street. Alice didn't think. She dropped the clothespins in the basket and moved with quick steps, almost clumsy with emotion. Her hands were already opening to receive her, imagining the warmth of her hug, that smell of strawberry shampoo the girl always wore. But she never reached her. A silhouette blocked her path abruptly. Kimberly appeared in the doorway, as tall and firm as a wall. Her lips formed a smile that didn't touch her eyes, and her black heels shone in the sunday. "What are you doing here?" she said to Mia in a dry tone, as if the girl were an intruder. "I came to see my grandma," the little girl replied, her voice muted. Alice tried to step around her, but Kimberly turned sharply, shoving her with her shoulder. The blow wasn't hard, but it was enough for the elderly woman to lose her balance and fall onto the rough patio stones. The world tilted for a second, and she felt her knees slam against the ground. "Grandma!" Mia exclaimed, but Kimberly grabbed her arm, pulling her away. Alice put her right hand down to push herself up, and it was then that the weight of a thin, sharp heel dug into her fingers. The pain was immediate and sharp, as if a hot poker were piercing her skin. "Stay there on the ground," Kimberly spat, grinding her heel in a little more before removing it with a sharp motion. Alice gritted her teeth. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but she felt the pain mix with a humiliation that burned more than the wound. She looked toward Mia, who was struggling to free herself from her mother's grasp, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Let me go," the girl begged. "Let me stay with her." But Kimberly didn't yield. She yanked her toward the street, slamming the gate shut with a bang that echoed through the yard. The sound of the slam seemed to hang in the air between the walls, along with the smell of soap and the dust kicked up by the fall. Alice remained on the ground for a few more seconds, her hand throbbing and red. The marks from the heel were beginning to swell, leaving a reddish pattern that pulsed with her heartbeat. She forced herself to take a deep breath. She didn't want the physical pain to defeat her, but the image of her granddaughter crying helplessly was stuck in her soul like a thorn impossible to remove. With effort, she got up. Her knees protested, and she could barely close her hand. She leaned on the wall to get to the kitchen, where she turned on the faucet and ran cold water over the wound. The relief was momentary. The burning was still there, as if every drop of water reminded her of the violence of the stomp. She looked at herself in the small mirror hanging above the sink. The reflection showed a woman with her short hair messed up from the fall, her blouse covered in dust, and her expression hardened. It wasn't just pain she saw. It was the certainty that something had changed forever. From the window, she could see Kimberly and Mia walking away down the sidewalk. The girl kept looking back, searching for her grandmother, until the corner swallowed her up. Alice felt a lump in her throat she couldn't swallow. This afternoon was not like the others. An invisible line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. She sat for a moment with her hand wrapped in a damp cloth. She heard a distant rooster crow and the sound of a motorcycle passing by. The neighborhood continued with its life, oblivious to what had just happened in her yard. But she knew someone had seen. She felt that gaze from somewhere, like a silent witness she couldn't ignore. As the pain in her hand grew, an idea began to form in her mind, still confused, but firm. She couldn't go on like this. She would not allow herself to be humiliated in front of her granddaughter again. And although she didn't know how, she sensed this would be the first step towards something bigger. She stood up slowly, looked at the clothesline with the clothes still moving in the wind, and thought that this afternoon would be engraved not only on her skin, but in the memory of all who would come to know her story. Because some wounds heal, and others turn into weapons. The blow of the heel was still echoing in Alice's memory when, the next morning, someone knocked insistently on the door. She opened it with her good hand and found Mr. Barry, her lifelong neighbor, a gray-haired man who spoke slowly, but who was breathing heavily this time. "Alice, I need to talk to you," he said, looking both ways before stepping inside. He closed the door and, without preamble, took his phone from his pocket. On the screen, a shaky image showed her own yard, seen from the angle of Mr. Barry's second-floor window. It showed Kimberly approaching, the push, the stomp on her hand, and then Mia's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't the whole incident, but it was enough for anyone to understand the scene. Alice felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just seeing what happened again. It was seeing it from the outside, as if it were some other woman being humiliated. I recorded it by accident. I heard voices and pointed my phone out, Mr. Barry explained. I didn't think it was that serious, but I watched it again last night, and, gosh, Alice, this isn't right. Alice put her healthy hand to her chest. Has anyone else seen it? Not yet, but... He paused. If you want, I can share it. People need to know what's happening here. She hesitated. She didn't want Mia to be exposed, but she also knew Kimberly always got away with it because everything was kept quiet. Share it, she finally said, her voice low but firm. Let them know. With those 3 words, the battle lines are officially drawn. A private humiliation is about to become public evidence, and Kimberly has no idea what Alice just unleashed. Keep listening, because this is the turning point that changes everything. That same afternoon, the video was already circulating on the neighborhood Facebook group. I can't believe it. What an abusive woman. And the son doesn't say anything? Were some of the messages accompanying the recording. By nightfall, it had reached other chats, even people Alice didn't know. At the corner convenience store, 2 neighbors were talking loudly, glancing toward her house. One of them, Mrs. Carol, greeted her with a wave and walked over. Alice, I saw the video. Are you okay? She asked, gently taking her hand. I'm managing, she replied with a half smile. Mrs. Carroll pressed her lips together. This doesn't just end here. I can testify if you need it. It's not the first time we've seen her acting high and mighty. Throughout the day, more visitors arrived. Some brought words of encouragement. Others simply wanted to confirm with their own eyes what they had seen on their phones. The rumor became a constant murmur that reached her yard. That evening, someone knocked on the door again. It was Leah, a young woman who worked at a clothing boutique and who had been Kimberly's employee a couple of years ago. I saw the video, she said bluntly. If you need it, I can tell you what she did to me when I worked for her. It wasn't the same, but she humiliates people and doesn't care if there are witnesses. Alice invited her in and listened to her story. The more they talked, the more evident it became that Kimberly hadn't just targeted her. She acted this way with anyone she considered weaker. Meanwhile, across the street, Mr. Barry continued to receive messages from people asking for the video. Some forwarded it with furious comments. Others asked if it could be reported. Alice, sitting at her kitchen table, watched her phone vibrate with endless messages. Part of her felt a strange relief. She wasn't alone anymore, at least not in what had happened. Another part, however, feared Martin's reaction. She knew he would find out sooner or later, and he did. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual, phone in hand, brow furrowed. "What is this that's circulating?" he asked without a greeting. Alice held his gaze. "It's what happened. And you let them record it?" "I didn't let them. It happened, and now people know." Martin pressed his lips together and put his phone away. "This is just going to make things worse, Mom." "No, son," she said with a calm she didn't know she had. "What makes things worse is staying silent." He didn't answer. He left the house without looking back, leaving a tense silence that Alice filled with a clear thought. The video wasn't just proof. It was a crack in the wall of impunity Kimberly had built. That night, before sleeping, she received a message from an unknown number. "I'm Rachel. I saw the video. I work with elder abuse cases. I want to help you." Alice read it twice, feeling that, for the first time in a long time, the scales might be starting to tip in her favor. Outside, the neighborhood continued to murmur, and she, her hand still aching, knew that this small video file was now her most faithful witness. And thanks to it, Kimberly could no longer pretend that nothing had happened. The doorbell rang insistently, interrupting the clinking of the spoon against the pot where Alice was boiling beans for dinner. The afternoon was warm, and the yard smelled of soap and damp earth. With her good hand, she wiped it on her apron and went to open the door. On the threshold was a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a high ponytail, a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, slacks, and flat shoes. She had a leather briefcase slung over her shoulder and a look that combined determination and tenderness. "Mrs. Alice?" she asked in a clear voice. "Yes, that's me. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm an attorney. I work with an organization that defends senior citizens. I saw the video circulating in the neighborhood, and I believe I can help you, if you'll let me." Alice, surprised, clutched the doorframe. She had been alone for so long. For decades, help was a word that meant charity, pity, or a debt she couldn't afford. She wasn't used to someone offering support that looked like strength. But there was something in the way Rachel looked at her direct, without evasion, a gaze that didn't pity her weakness, but recognized her pain that gave her a spark of an unfamiliar feeling, hope. She felt like a person drowning, and someone had just thrown her a rope. "Come in," she whispered, her voice rough. "Please, come in, honey." After a lifetime of fierce independence, accepting help is sometimes the hardest step. But this isn't charity, it's a lifeline. This one moment, this single come in, is about to change the entire dynamic of power in that house. They went into the kitchen. Rachel placed her briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a thin folder. Inside were forms, official letterhead, and a notebook with notes. "I don't want to take up much of your time," she said as she sat down. "But what I saw in that video cannot be ignored. You have clear proof and witnesses. Not everyone gets that chance." Alice looked down at her bandaged, still swollen hand. "Proof won't stop people from being outraged for a little while and then moving on with their lives," she murmured. "That's why I'm here," Rachel replied, "to make sure it's not forgotten. If you allow me to represent you, we can file a report for assault and domestic violence, request a restraining order, and ensure that woman never enters your house again." Alice swallowed, her heart pounding. "And my son? He lives with her." "Your son can decide who he lives with, but the house is yours. No one has the right to stay if you don't authorize it, and the law is on your side, even if it's not often used." The words, "the house is yours," resonated like a reminder Kimberly tried to erase every day. Alice thought of Mia, of the scene with the heel, of her look of fear. What would I have to do? First, go to an urgent care clinic for a medical certificate documenting the injuries. Then, give me a detailed account, dates, places, everything you've experienced since the abuse began, and contact witnesses. The neighbor who recorded, the people who saw it. Anyone who can tell what has happened here. Mr. Barry and Leah, the young woman who worked for Kimberly, Alice listed. They said they would talk. Perfect. With that, we have a solid foundation, Rachel replied, writing quickly, and I will accompany you every step of the way. The wall clock read 5:30. Outside, children were playing with a ball, and the echo of their voices came through the window. Alice began to speak. Slowly at first, then without pausing. She told how Kimberly had arrived, changing things, imposing rules, criticizing every meal, every habit. She talked about the first time she felt her own home no longer belonged to her, and of the day when, in front of her granddaughter, she had been knocked down and her hands stomped on. Rachel wrote, occasionally looking up with a contained indignation visible in the tension of her jaw. "You do not have to endure this, Mrs. Alice," she said when she finished. "No one has the right to humiliate you in your own home." Alice let out a slow breath, as if she had been holding it for weeks. "I'm afraid it will get worse," she admitted. "It's possible they'll make things difficult," Rachel agreed. "But if you don't act now, they will continue until you have nothing left to defend." She stood up, closed the folder, and took out a business card. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll go to the clinic first, and then to the district attorney's office. Do you agree?" Alice took the card. Rachel Thompson, attorney at law, elder advocacy, it said in firm letters. "I agree," she said, feeling those words were a first step. When Rachel left, the house was silent. Alice sat at the table with the card in one hand, and the other resting on the floral tablecloth Kimberly had wanted to store away. She looked at the shelf, where the photo of Mia blowing out candles on her last birthday was. "We're going to fight, my girl," she whispered. "I'm not going to let them." Outside, the azaleas swayed in the wind, and Alice felt, for the first time in a long time, that she would not face the storm alone. The sun was barely up when Alice heard the honk in front of her house. She peeked through the window. Rachel was standing next to a gray sedan, her hair in a high ponytail, a thick folder under her arm, and the expression of someone who had come to work, not to chat. "Ready, Mrs. Alice?" she said as soon as she saw her open the door. "Today we start building your case." Alice, her purse in one hand and the other bandaged, locked the door and got into the car. The morning air was cool, but her heart was racing. She couldn't remember the last time she had gone out so early with such a clear purpose. The community clinic was just a few blocks away, but the drive seemed longer. At every corner, Alice felt the stares of neighbors who had already seen the video. She didn't know if they were supportive or curious, but she didn't lower her head. At the reception desk, Rachel explained the situation in a confident voice. "We need a legal medical certificate. It's an elder abuse case with witnesses and audio-visual evidence." In minutes, a tall doctor with an impeccable lab coat called them in. The exam room smelled like disinfectant and had a bright white light that made everything feel colder. "Let's check that hand," the doctor said. As Alice sat on the exam table, she extended the injured hand. The doctor carefully removed the bandage, revealing the reddened skin, the bruise creeping up her wrist, and a small cut on her thumb. "It hurts when you move it, doesn't it?" he asked. "Like needles are stabbing me," she replied with a wince. The doctor touched different areas, pressing gently, and noted her every reaction. Then he took photos from several angles, making sure to include the date and time in the record. Blunt force trauma, soft tissue damage, and signs of compression, he dictated as he wrote. "I'm going to prescribe anti-inflammatories and rest, but the important thing is that this report is as detailed as possible for the complaint." Rachel checked that the document included the description of the incident and the mention that it occurred in front of a minor. The doctor added it without argument. "This will help a lot," the lawyer commented as they left. "It's the first piece of official evidence." Back in the car, Rachel consulted a list in her notebook. "Now we need the deed to your house. It's crucial to prove the property is yours." Alice nodded. They arrived at her house and went straight to the room that was once Martin's, now used for storage. Amid boxes and furniture covered by sheets, Alice knelt in front of a wooden trunk with rusted fittings. "It's in here," she said, lifting the lid, which creaked as it opened. Inside were memories of a lifetime. Tablecloths embroidered by her mother, yellowed letters, photo albums with worn edges. At the bottom was a blue plastic folder. Alice pulled it out, and opening it, she found the document she had protected for decades. The deed to the house with her full name in black ink under the notary's signature. Rachel reviewed it page by page. "This is untouchable," she affirmed. "No one can kick you out of here without your consent." Alice pressed the document to her chest for a moment before handing it over for Rachel to put in her folder. This is how a true battle is fought. The doctor's report turned her private pain into cold, hard fact. And that deed, that isn't just paper. It's 15 years of sacrifice, and she's placing all of it in Rachel's hands. They have the proof of the injury and the proof of ownership. Now, they need the voices, and the strength of this community is about to be tested. "Let's go see the witnesses," the lawyer instructed. The first stop was Mr. Barry's shop. The man was stocking soda crates when he saw them enter. "Alice already told me you want my statement," he said. "Not only did I see what happened, I recorded it, and I'm not planning on staying quiet." Rachel took his full details and asked for a copy of the file. Mr. Barry sent it via text message instantly, ensuring it was backed up. "That woman thinks she can do whatever she wants, and the boy. Well, don't get me started," he added, shaking his head. "But we're here for whatever you need." The next visit was to Leah's house, the young woman who had worked for Kimberly. She opened the door with a mix of shyness and resolve. "I didn't see the day of the stomp, but I can tell you what she did to me when I worked for her. She yelled at me, insulted me in front of customers, and docked my pay for a day. If it helps stop her, I'll testify." Rachel noted every detail. It not only added a character witness, but also showed a pattern of behavior. As they left, they stopped on the sidewalk. Rachel took out the folder and reviewed it out loud. Medical certificate, deed to the house, eyewitness with video, character witness. With this, we can file the formal complaint tomorrow and request protective measures. Alice looked down the street, where some kids were playing with a ball. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight in her chest was a little lighter. "Do you really think we can win?" she asked. "I don't think so, Mrs. Alice," Rachel replied with a small smile. "I know so." Back at home, Rachel handed her a paper with the upcoming appointments. The district attorney's office, an interview with the prosecutor, and a meeting with a medical examiner. Rest today. Tomorrow the hard part begins, she advised. When the door closed, Alice stood in the yard looking at her azaleas. The wind moved the flowers, and for the first time in weeks, that movement didn't seem like a reminder of loneliness, but a sign that she was alive and standing. She knew the road would be tough, but now she had proof, witnesses, and, above all, an ally who wasn't afraid to face Kimberly. And in silence, she swore she wouldn't take a single step back. The echo of footsteps resonated in the hallway of the courthouse. Alice walked slowly, her bandaged hand resting at her side, and next to her, Rachel advanced with a firm step, the folder of evidence clutched under her arm. There were no flowers in the air, no aroma of coffee, only the metallic smell of old desks and the constant hum of fans that failed to cool the tension in the place. They were summoned to a small room with cream-colored walls and a rectangular table in the center. There were 3 chairs on one side and 3 on the other. An official with thick glasses reviewed papers. "The other party will be in shortly," she announced without looking up. Alice took a deep breath. Rachel touched her shoulder briefly, a reminder she wasn't alone. The door opened and Martin entered. He wore a light-colored shirt, poorly ironed, and his gaze was fixed on the floor. Behind him, Kimberly, immaculate in a fitted dress, her perfume filling the room in seconds. Alice felt a punch in her stomach, but she didn't look away. Martin took the chair opposite her, avoiding her gaze. Kimberly sat beside him, crossed her legs, and rested her elbow on the table as if this were a business meeting. "Let's proceed," said the official. "Mrs. Alice, please state the facts in chronological order and with detail." Rachel passed her a sheet of notes. Alice set it aside. She didn't need to read to remember. "It all started when Kimberly moved into my house. From the first day, she criticized my food, the way I clean, how I dress. Little by little, she started moving my things, making decisions about the yard, the kitchen, even my plants." Martin clenched his hands on the table. "I put up with it because I thought it was just an adjustment period," Alice continued. "But it got worse. One day she told me I couldn't hang laundry in the yard anymore, that it was embarrassing. Another time she threw away my floral tablecloth, saying it looked like something from a country diner. Her voice trembled, but she held it steady. On the 14th of this month, I was hanging laundry. I heard the voice of my granddaughter, Mia. I went toward the door and Kimberly pushed me. I fell to the ground, and she stomped on my hand with her heel. Mia was crying, but she dragged her away, saying, 'Stay there on the ground.'" There was a heavy silence. The wall clock ticked off the seconds like a slow hammer. "My neighbor saw all of this and recorded a video," Alice added. "And it's not the first time she has assaulted me." Martin looked up for the first time. His eyes met his mother's, and for an instant, he seemed to be searching for something, a sign she was exaggerating, a loophole to escape this reality. But he didn't find it. "Is what your mother says true?" the official asked. Martin swallowed. "I didn't see the exact moment. But you knew about the abuse," she insisted. Kimberly intervened, smiling with artificial calm. "These are normal arguments. She's very sensitive." Rachel tapped the table with the tip of her pen. "There is a medical report, photographs, witnesses, and a video. We are not talking about sensitivity." The official raised her hand, asking for silence. "Mr. Martin, you must answer, not your partner." Martin turned to Alice. "Mom, I thought they were just differences." "Differences don't leave you with a bruised hand," she replied without raising her voice. "Differences don't make your daughter cry." He lowered his head. The official finished her notes and announced they would continue with formal statements. As they signed documents, Alice felt a mix of relief and sadness. She had said everything with him sitting right there, and although she didn't know if he had heard her as a son or as a stranger, it was no longer a secret. When they stood up to leave, Martin avoided looking at her again. Kimberly passed by closely with her heavy perfume and smirked slightly, as if promising the war wasn't over. Rachel opened the door for her and accompanied her into the hall. "Today was important," she said. "He heard it from you, looking you in the eyes. That carries more weight than you imagine." Alice nodded. She walked toward the exit, feeling that although the battle was just beginning, she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Outside, the sun was blinding, and the air was warm. She lifted her face to the sky, letting the light hit her fully. She had nothing left to hide. And even if Martin didn't know where to look, she knew exactly where she was walking. Forward. The courtroom clock struck 9 as Alice walked through the heavy wooden doors. The echo of her steps on the polished floor resonated in the nearly empty room. She wore her best ironed blouse, and her short hair was neatly combed. It wasn't vanity, it was dignity. At her side, Rachel held the thick folder with the evidence, the medical certificate, photos of the injury, a copy of the house deed, written witness statements, and, above all, the video that had ignited the neighborhood's indignation. On the bench, the judge skimmed some documents. His presence was imposing, a tall man with a sharp gaze who didn't look inclined to waste time on pleasantries. Across from Alice's table sat Kimberly, immaculate in a fitted ivory-colored dress, crossing her legs with an air of superiority. At her side, Martin, frowning, his hands clasped, avoiding his mother's gaze. "We shall proceed," the judge announced in a grave voice. "We will review the case regarding violence against a senior citizen and the claim to the property." Rachel stood up. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Alice, 76 years old, was physically assaulted by Mrs. Kimberly, the victim's daughter-in-law, in the presence of her minor granddaughter. The assault is documented in a video recorded by a neighbor and has been confirmed by a medical report." "Exaggerations," Kimberly interrupted with a fake smile. "It was a domestic accident. She tripped and—" "Silence," the judge ordered, banging his gavel lightly. "You will have your turn to speak." The court assistant placed a screen in front of the bench and played the video. The images, though recorded from a distance, clearly showed the push, the fall, and the stomping on Alice's hand, followed by Mia's crying. A heavy silence fell over the room. "The audio is clear, Your Honor," Rachel added. "The phrase, 'stay there on the ground,' is perfectly audible." The judge nodded, taking notes. "Furthermore," Rachel continued, "the witness who recorded the video is present and willing to ratify it, as is Mrs. Leah, who worked for the accused, and will testify about an abusive pattern of behavior." "That has nothing to do with this." Kimberly jumped up. "They are bringing gossip from my private life." "Silence," the judge repeated, this time more firmly. "If you interrupt again, I will have you removed from the courtroom." Kimberly dropped back into her chair, pressing her lips together. Martin stared at the floor. The judge asked to hear from the doctor who prepared the report. He detailed the nature of the injury. "The mark and pattern of the contusion are consistent with the impact of a stiletto heel on the hand. It is not consistent with an accidental fall." Kimberly shook her head, muttering something no one could understand. "Mrs. Alice," said the judge, "do you wish to add anything?" Alice stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she gripped the rail. She looked at Martin, her son, the boy whose every shirt she had sewn with her own hands. Then she looked at the judge. Her voice, when it came, was not the whisper Kimberly had tried to reduce her to, but the clear, strong tone of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm, "when my husband died, I had nothing. Just a 3-year-old boy and a sewing machine. I sewed my grief into every stitch for 45 years. I sewed so my son could have shoes. I sewed so he could have an education. I sewed until my fingers bled and my back ached, and I built a home out of thread and sacrifice." She paused, turning her gaze to Kimberly. "I did not survive all of that just to be treated like dirt in my own home. The person he chose as a partner has insulted me, humiliated me, and ground her heel into my hand in front of my granddaughter. I am not here for revenge. I am here because my dignity is not for sale. My peace is not for her to take. I am here because I will not allow anyone to take away what cost me more than a lifetime. It cost me my entire life. Decades of silence, pain, and sacrifice, all distilled into one moment of pure, unshakable truth. This is no longer just the seamstress. This is a warrior claiming her voice. Her words have filled the courtroom, but will they be enough to reclaim her home? The judge's decision is next. A murmur went through the room. Rachel remained serious, but a flash of pride shone in her eyes. The judge reviewed the final documents and closed the folder. It is proven, with compelling evidence, that Mrs. Kimberly physically assaulted Mrs. Alice. It is also established that the ownership of the residence belongs to the plaintiff. Kimberly opened her mouth to say something, but the judge raised his hand. The ruling is as follows. An immediate restraining order for the accused, prohibited from coming within 200 yards of Mrs. Alice and the minor, Mia. The accused and Mr. Martin must vacate the residence within a maximum of 48 hours. The bang of the gavel sealed the decision. Court is adjourned. Kimberly sat frozen, her hands clenched on her knees. Martin looked up at his mother, but she had turned to Rachel, who gave her a gentle pat on the back. "We did it," the lawyer whispered. "Now the law is on your side." Leaving the courthouse, several neighbors who had attended as spectators approached Alice. "Well done, Alice," said Mrs. Carroll, giving her a hug. "It's about time that woman got what she deserved." Alice smiled, thanking them for every word. She knew the war with Kimberly wasn't entirely over, but this battle, the most difficult one, she had won. As she walked down the courthouse steps, she felt the air was lighter. Outside, the sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time, the light didn't feel heavy on her face. She walked slowly, without rushing, because now every step was taking her back to her home and the life she was determined to reclaim. The verdict was still ringing in Alice's head when the clock struck 9 the next day and the gate was opened with the metallic sound of the latch. Outside, on the sidewalk, a sheriff's deputy held a sealed envelope with the court seal. Rachel, punctual as always, stood beside him. "Mrs. Alice, this is the official document," the officer said, handing her the envelope. "Eviction order, 48 hours, for Mrs. Alice. Kimberly and Mr. Martin." Alice took it with both hands. The paper was thin, but it felt as heavy as all the years of sacrifice they had tried to snatch from her. Rachel read it aloud, paragraph by paragraph, making sure it was clear. They had to leave the house with no possibility of immediate appeal, and were prohibited from approaching her or Mia. "It's the law," the lawyer said. "There's no way they can ignore it without consequences." As they spoke, two neighbors, Mrs. Carroll and Mr. Barry, approached the gate. "Is it true?" Mrs. Carroll asked with a contained smile. "They're leaving in 2 days," Rachel confirmed. The news spread faster than wind. Within hours, the entire street seemed to know. Some neighbors peeked from their windows. Others approached with words of encouragement. "It's about time," a man commented from the corner. That woman thought she could do and undo as she pleased. Inside the house, Kimberly and Martin were in the kitchen when they received their copy of the order. Martin read it in silence, his jaw tight. Kimberly, however, let out a dry laugh. "Ridiculous." "This isn't over," she said, tossing the paper on the table. "Kimberly," Martin began, but she held up her hand. "I refuse to leave like I'm defeated." However, the law left no room for argument. In less than 24 hours, the officer would return to verify they were gone. Alice avoided any unnecessary contact. She spent the rest of the day in the yard watering her azaleas, as if every blooming flower was a reminder that she was reclaiming her space. With every step she took, she heard the echo of Kimberly's heels in her memory, but now those echoes sounded distant, fading into the street. In the afternoon, several neighbors knocked on the door. They brought casseroles, coffee, and wide smiles. "This isn't just for you, Alice," said Mrs. Carroll. "It's a victory for all of us. They won't think they can just trample anyone anymore." Alice invited them in. The aroma of coffee filled the living room, and voices filled the corners that for months had been heavy with tension. Rachel, sitting by the window, watched in silence, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows they did the right thing. Meanwhile, Kimberly began throwing clothes into suitcases. She did it with rough movements, slamming drawers, as if by doing so she could mark the territory she was already losing. Martin helped her without speaking. His shoulders slumped and his brow furrowed. That night, Alice heard them closing doors and dragging bags down the hall. She didn't need to look. She knew they were packing what they could take. She didn't feel pity, just a deep exhaustion, as if she were finally setting down a weight she had carried on her back for years. The second day dawned clear. Mid-morning, the sheriff's deputy returned, accompanied by 2 police officers. Rachel also arrived, notebook in hand. "Time to enforce the order," the officer announced. Kimberly came down the stairs wearing dark sunglasses, an arrogant expression, and a large suitcase. Martin followed behind, carrying 2 boxes. They didn't exchange a word with Alice. "Time's up," the officer said, signing a document. "The house is now under the exclusive custody of the owner." Kimberly passed by Alice and paused for just a second. "Enjoy your victory, old woman," she whispered before continuing on her way. Alice didn't respond. She watched her walk away down the street, with Martin dragging the weight of their belongings and their decisions. As soon as the gate closed, the neighbors who had gathered outside began to applaud. It wasn't loud applause, but firm, filled with respect. Some gave a thumbs up, others hugged her. The applause from the neighbors isn't just for a legal victory, it's for her courage. The intruders are gone, but the echoes of their cruelty remain. Now, the most important part of Alice's journey begins. Not just reclaiming her house, but healing her home. Let's see how she rebuilds her life. "This is for you," said Mr. Barry, "but also so everyone knows we're not alone." Alice, key in hand, looked toward the street and then at her house. She felt every corner becoming hers again. The kitchen smelling of coffee cake, the yard with the azaleas in bloom, the room where she kept her memories. That day, as evening fell, she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to the murmur of the street. It was a different murmur, not of gossip or curiosity, but of approval and calm. She knew life would go on, that the wounds would take time to heal, but in that moment, she had something that had been stolen from her for months: peace. And that peace, for her, was the greatest victory of all. The street was hot under the midday sun when Kimberly and Martin turned the corner, dragging their suitcases and boxes. There were no goodbyes, no backward glances. The gate to Alice's house remained closed, like a page they could no longer reopen. The neighbors' applause, soft but firm, faded as they walked away. Martin felt the weight of the boxes, not just in his arms, but in his stomach. It was the bitter mix of shame and uncertainty. Kimberly, wearing dark sunglasses, her face impassive, walked quickly, as if fleeing a place where she could no longer impose her will. That same afternoon, they arrived at an apartment a friend of Martin's had offered them as a favor, a room in an attic of an old building, with a tin roof and cracked plaster walls. The access hallway smelled of dampness and cooking gas. "It's temporary," Martin said, more to convince himself than Kimberly. She looked around, one eyebrow raised. The room had only one small window, a single bed with a sagging mattress, and an old piece of furniture that served as a wardrobe. "This looks like a storage unit," she declared, dropping her suitcase on the bed with a thud. "There's no way I'm staying here long." But temporary dragged on. The first week, Martin tried to return to his job at the distribution center. His boss received him with a serious expression. "I saw the video," he said bluntly. "We don't want those kinds of problems here." Martin left with his severance pay in hand and a hole in his chest. He didn't tell Kimberly until that night, but she already knew. The stares on the street, the half-whispered comments, everything was a reminder that the scandal hadn't stayed in the neighborhood. Kimberly, for her part, tried to resume her job at the boutique where she had been the manager. The owner, usually a kind woman, barely greeted her this time. "It's not a good time for you to come back. People are talking, and the clients are very sensitive to these things." She returned to the room, heels in hand, her lips pressed tight. "One badly told rumor, and everyone thinks they're a judge," she said, throwing the shoes in a corner. But it wasn't a rumor. The video had spread through social media, text messages, and neighborhood groups. The image of Kimberly stomping on Alice's hand and dragging Mia away was indelible. Soon, they began to cut expenses. They sold some jewelry, then a small television. The rent for the room wasn't high, but with no steady income, every dollar became a difficult decision. They ate the cheapest food, and Kimberly's luxury clothes began to pile up, unused, reminding her of a time that seemed increasingly distant. Friendships, once numerous, evaporated. The messages on their phones dwindled to impersonal chains. Invitations to gatherings disappeared. When they tried to approach acquaintances, the answer was always the same: "We'll let you know." But they never called. One night, while eating bread and coffee for dinner, Martin broke the silence. "We have to find something out of here, in another neighborhood." "And with what money?" Kimberly replied, without looking at him. "I'm not going to clean houses or sell things on the street." "Me neither," he said, though his voice held no confidence, only exhaustion. The arguments became frequent. Kimberly blamed him for not defending her in court. He blamed her for not thinking about her actions and dragging them into this situation. But neither admitted aloud what they knew deep down. They had lost something not easily recovered, the place where they felt untouchable. In Alice's neighborhood, life went on, but every time someone mentioned Kimberly or Martin's name, it was with a mix of pity and disdain. The "did you hear?" had become, "you know how they are." Meanwhile, in the rented room, the dampness began to stain the walls, and the tin roof let in the pre-dawn cold. Kimberly covered herself with 2 blankets, with no heels or elegant dresses, and thought about how she had gone from walking through Alice's living room as if she owned it, to sleeping in a place where she couldn't even stretch her arms without touching the wall. Martin, lying on a makeshift cot, mentally replayed the days leading up to the eviction order. The image of his mother, standing in court, speaking with a steady voice, haunted him. It wasn't just the shame of having lost, it was the certainty that, for the first time, she had looked at him without a trace of fear. The exile wasn't just physical. It was social, economic, and personal. They were left without a home, without jobs, without friends, and worst of all, without anyone's respect. And although Kimberly kept saying, "This isn't over," deep down, she was beginning to understand that this time, there was no way to get back what they had lost. Outside of Alice's house, they weren't the ones in charge anymore. They were barely a shadow of what they once believed themselves to be. The first dawn without the presence of Kimberly and Martin brought a different kind of silence to the house. It wasn't empty. It was a clean, warm silence, mixed with birdsong and the gentle rustling of the azaleas moving in the breeze. Alice opened the windows one by one, letting the fresh air flow through every room. For the first time in months, the smell filling her living room wasn't of foreign perfumes or contained tension, but of freshly brewed coffee and toast. She paused in the center of the living room, looking around. The curtains Kimberly had insisted on were gone. In their place, Alice had rehung the light fabric ones with flowers embroidered by her mother. Light flooded in, painting the wooden floor golden. She smiled, feeling that every sunbeam was reclaiming a lost corner. That same day, she decided it was time to redecorate, not to show off, but to make the house speak its own language again. She went to the sewing room, dusted off a set of throw pillows she had stored years ago, and placed them on the sofa. She put the floral tablecloth Kimberly had despised back on the table, ironed with care, like someone reinstalling a flag after a won battle. It's amazing how much power a simple object can hold. That tablecloth isn't just fabric, it's her mother, her history, and her dignity, ironed out for the world to see. Alice is reclaiming her space stitch by stitch, but the house is still quiet. Now, she must see if the community she fought for will return to fill the silence. The kitchen was next. She opened all the cabinets, took out plates, mugs, and pots, washed what had been stored, and arranged everything her way. On the stove, a chicken soup with vegetables began to simmer, the kind that perfumes the whole house. The aroma escaped through the windows, reaching the street and catching the attention of passers-by. "Alice," shouted Mrs. Carroll from the sidewalk. "That smells nourishing. Come on over, woman. There's enough for everyone." Alice replied, her voice cheerful. In a short time, the dining room began to fill up. First, Mrs. Carroll arrived with a bag of warm rolls, then Mr. Barry with a soda, and later Leah, the young woman who had testified against Kimberly, with a tray of pastries. Each arrival brought more laughter, more stories, more life. The sound of spoons hitting plates mixed with the murmur of crisscrossing conversations. The neighbors talked about everything: the market, the weather, the new shop on the corner. But deep down, they all knew this gathering was more than just a meal. It was a silent celebration of Alice's return to her own space. Mia arrived late in the afternoon, after school. Seeing the house full of people, her face lit up. "Grandma!" She ran to her. "It smells like it used to." "As it always should have smelled," Alice replied, hugging her tightly. The girl sat beside her at the table and began to tell her about her homework, the games at recess, and the song she was learning in music class. Alice listened with an attention that required no effort. Every word from Mia was a gift. In the following days, the activity in the house didn't stop. Alice decided to paint the patio with the help of some neighbors. She chose a light color that reflected the light and let the azaleas grow freely, without drastic pruning. She put out pots with aromatic herbs, basil, mint, and cilantro to always have freshness in her kitchen. Every morning she opened the front door wide. There was no more fear of who might come in or what they might say. Now, visitors were welcome, as were long chats on the porch and shared cups of coffee without rush. One afternoon, Rachel arrived unannounced. "I had to see with my own eyes how this place looks now," she said, scanning the living room with a smile. "It's just as I wanted it," Alice replied. "Like my home." Rachel stayed for lunch, and between bites, she told her the case was now officially closed in her favor. "There's no possibility of them trying to get it back. It's legally ironclad." Alice nodded. She didn't need more confirmation, but hearing those words was like placing the last brick in a wall that would protect what was hers. As night fell, when everyone had left and the house was calm, Alice went out to the yard with a cup of tea. The warm lights illuminated the freshly painted walls, and the azalea blossoms fell like soft rain on the floor. She sat in her rocking chair, breathing deeply. She thought about everything that had happened, the days of humiliation, the physical pain, the silent fear she had felt in front of Kimberly. And then she thought about this exact moment, the cool air, the smell of damp earth, the distant murmur of the street. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a living refuge, full of laughter, aromas, and friendly voices. And Alice could finally inhabit it without anyone else's shadow. She stroked the warm mug and said to herself in a low voice, as if speaking to the night, "This is my new dawn, and no one is going to darken it again." The next morning, the sun streamed through the window, illuminating the floral tablecloth. Alice placed 2 steaming mugs on it as Mia ran to her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Grandma," Mia whispered, "I'm never going to let anyone make you cry again." Alice smiled, the smile of a warrior who had reclaimed her peace. She handed the mug to her granddaughter. "You know, my girl," she said, looking out at the azaleas blooming in the yard, "some coffee just burns you and leaves a scar. But other coffee, it warms you right down to the soul." She took a sip, the aroma rich and familiar. "I choose to keep the second kind." Alice's story is a reminder that no matter how cruel the darkness, dignity and courage will always win. She got her house back, but more importantly, she reclaimed her peace and her voice. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and share it, because every one of us deserves a sanctuary, a home where no one has the right to trample on our dignity.